January 31st, 1968, the ancient imperial city of Hue, central Vietnam. The Tet Offensive has begun, and the city has fallen. Thousands of North Vietnamese army regulars and Viet Cong fighters hold the streets, the houses, the courtyards, the ancient citadel, and every marine unit in the area is being thrown into the fight to take it back. Down a cratered boulevard, moving slowly between the burning shells of buildings, comes something that does not look like it belongs in any military on Earth. It is tiny, barely taller than a man's chest, riding low on tracks like a crouching animal. And from its flat angular body, 6 enormous gun barrels project outward in 3 pairs, 2 on each side and 2 on top, jutting out like the legs of a mechanical insect. It looks absurd. It looks like a mistake, something a welder built on a dare. It is so small that its crew of 3 can barely fit inside. Its armor is so thin that a heavy machine gun can punch through it at combat range. It carries no turret rings strong enough for a proper cannon. It has no business being in a street fight against an entrenched enemy armed with rocket-propelled grenades, recoilless rifles, and heavy machine guns behind concrete walls. And yet, when this strange little machine fires, an entire building comes down. Not a wall, not a floor, the building. Because each of those 6 barrels is a 106mm recoilless rifle, and when all 6 of them speak at once, they deliver a volley of high-explosive anti-tank rounds that can crack a fortified position open like an eggshell from 300 meters away. The Marines in Hue called it many things. The bug, the beast, the cockroach. The army, which had rejected it years earlier and refused to operate it at all, had a different word for it. They called it a waste of money, a flawed concept, a vehicle that solved no problem any serious planner had identified. Its actual name was Greek, Ontos. It means simply the thing. Not a proud title, not a designation that suggests confidence, just the thing, as though nobody could quite decide what it was or what to call it. The thing would become the most devastating close combat weapon of the Battle of Hue. It would clear streets that no tank could enter and no infantry squad could survive crossing. It would fire thousands of rounds into fortified buildings at point-blank range. And when the battle was over, the Marines who had fought beside it would say openly and repeatedly that without the Ontos, they could not have retaken the city. Its designation was the M50 Ontos, and it is the story of the most ridiculed, most rejected, and most secretly devastating armored vehicle of the Vietnam War. To understand why the Ontos existed, you have to go back to a debate that consumed the American military in the years after the Second World War, a debate about how to kill tanks. The army had learned a brutal lesson in Europe. Soviet armor was coming in mass, and the standard American response, the towed anti-tank gun, was too slow, too heavy, and too easy to destroy before it ever fired a shot. What was needed, the theorists argued, was a tank destroyer that could move fast, hit hard, and disappear before the enemy could respond. Not a tank itself, because a tank was expensive, heavy, and slow to produce in the numbers a full-scale war with the Soviets would demand. Something lighter, cheaper, faster. Something that could be built in enormous quantities and distributed across the entire front, putting anti-tank firepower wherever the Soviet columns appeared. The answer was the recoilless rifle, a weapon that had been developed during the war and refined rapidly afterward. A recoilless rifle fires a powerful shell but vents the propellant gases backward through an open breech, cancelling the recoil that would otherwise require a heavy carriage to absorb. The result is a weapon with the punch of a conventional cannon at a fraction of the weight. The trade-off is the enormous backblast, a jet of flame and gas that erupts from the rear of the weapon every time it fires, making it impossible to fire from an enclosed space and instantly revealing the firing position to anyone watching. Alice Chalmers, a company better known for building tractors and industrial machinery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, won the contract to design a vehicle around this weapon. What they produced was the M50, a tracked chassis weighing just under 9 tons, carrying 6 M40 106mm recoilless rifles mounted in 3 pairs, 2 on each side of the hull and 2 on top. Each rifle was fitted with a smaller DOS, 50 caliber spotting rifle bolted to its barrel, a weapon that fired tracer rounds on the same trajectory as the main gun, allowing the gunner to confirm his aim before committing a full-sized round. The vehicle could fire its rifles individually, in pairs, or in theory all 6 simultaneously, though firing all 6 at once generated forces that risked damaging the vehicle itself and was almost never done in practice. 18 rounds were carried inside the hull, 3 per rifle, enough for 3 full volleys before the crew had to reload. And this is where the Ontos revealed its most critical and most damning vulnerability. To reload the rifles, the crew had to get out of the vehicle. There was no way to reload from inside the hull. A crewman had to climb out, stand exposed beside the weapon, physically lift a round that weighed over 20 kilograms, and slide it into the breech of the rifle while under whatever fire the enemy chose to direct at him. In the testing grounds of Aberdeen and Fort Knox, this was an inconvenience. In a firefight in Hue, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. Every reload cycle put a man outside the armor for 30 seconds or more, completely exposed, handling heavy ammunition in the open. The armor itself offered little comfort to anyone inside. The hull was welded aluminum and steel, 13 millimeters at its thickest, enough to stop small arms fire and shell splinters at a distance, but vulnerable to heavy machine guns at close range and completely inadequate against any anti-tank weapon. A single rocket-propelled grenade would go through it without slowing down. The Ontos was not designed to take a hit. It was designed to shoot first and leave before anyone could shoot back. Now, before we get into the battle where this absurd little vehicle became the most feared weapon on the street, if you are finding this deep dive worthwhile, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, and it keeps this channel producing content at this depth. The United States Army had tested the Ontos through the mid-1950s and rejected it. The official assessment was damning. The recoilless rifles generated massive backblast signatures that gave away the vehicle's position immediately. The external reload requirement was unacceptable in a high-intensity combat environment. The armor was inadequate. The vehicle was too small to carry enough ammunition for sustained combat. Every one of those criticisms was technically correct. The Army passed, and the Ontos should have died right there. The United States Marine Corps saved it. The Marines had a different set of problems. They needed something light enough to be carried by helicopter and amphibious ship, small enough to operate in the confined spaces of an amphibious beachhead, and powerful enough to kill a tank or destroy a bunker if one appeared. The Marines did not have the heavy armor that the Army relied on. They fought light, fast, and with whatever they could carry off the beach. The Ontos fit that description in a way no other vehicle could. At 9 tons, it could go where a 50-ton tank could not. A CH-53 helicopter could lift it. A landing craft could carry multiples. And those 6 rifles, for all their flaws, put more instantaneous anti-armor firepower on a single chassis than anything else in the Marine inventory. The Marines took approximately 297 Ontos vehicles into service beginning in 1956. They were deployed with anti-tank battalions, and the crews trained for the mission the vehicle was designed for, ambushing enemy armor at close range and withdrawing before the enemy could respond. That was the theory. The war they actually got was Vietnam. And in Vietnam, there were no Soviet tank columns to ambush. The enemy fought from bunkers, from tree lines, from tunnels, from houses, from spider holes dug into the jungle floor. The anti-tank mission evaporated overnight. The Ontos needed a new reason to exist, and it found one that nobody had imagined. In the close terrain of Vietnam, the 6 recoilless rifles turned out to be the most devastating direct fire support weapon the Marines had. A single Ontos could roll up to a tree line or a bunker complex, level its 6 barrels and fire a volley that shattered everything in front of it. The high-explosive anti-tank round, designed to burn through steel armor, was equally effective at collapsing earthen bunkers and blowing apart fortified fighting positions. But it was the flechette round, the beehive round, that made the Ontos truly terrifying in Vietnam. Each beehive round contained approximately 8,000 tiny steel darts, flechettes, that sprayed outward from the barrel in a cone of metal. At close range, a single beehive round from a 106mm recoilless rifle was like a gigantic shotgun blast that shredded everything in its path. 6 rifles firing beehive rounds simultaneously created a wall of steel darts that no human assault could survive. The Marines used this capability with devastating effect in defensive positions. When a ground attack came at night, when waves of infantry charged across open ground toward a Marine perimeter, the Ontos crews fired beehive rounds into the assault and stopped it dead. Survivors of those attacks described the sound as something between a roar and a scream, and the effect as instantaneous and total. Then came Hue, and the Ontos found the battle it was born for, in a war and a setting that no designer had ever imagined. On January 31, 1968, North Vietnamese forces seized almost the entire city. The Marines were ordered to retake it block by block, house by house, room by room. This was urban combat at its most brutal, the kind of fighting that eats infantry and chews through ammunition at rates that no supply chain can comfortably sustain. The Marines had tanks in Hue. They had M48 patterns, heavy, well-armed, well-armored, but the patterns were too wide for many of the streets. They were too heavy for the smaller bridges. They were high-value targets that drew every rocket-propelled grenade in the area. and they could not depress their main guns low enough to engage targets in the ground floor windows and doorways where the North Vietnamese fighters were dug in. The Ontos could do all of it. It was small enough to fit down the narrow streets. It was light enough to cross the bridges. Its 6 rifles could be depressed to fire directly into ground floor positions at point-blank range. And unlike a tank which carried a single main gun and had to reload between shots, the Ontos could fire 6 rounds in rapid succession, saturating a target with high explosive before the defenders could react. Marine commanders in Hue began using the Ontos as a doorbreaker. The technique was simple and annihilating. Infantry would identify a fortified building. The Ontos would roll forward, level its rifles at the wall, and fire. The rounds would blast through the masonry and detonate inside, collapsing the position. The infantry would advance through the rubble. Then the Ontos would reload, move to the next building and do it again. The reload problem that had horrified the army testers became, in practice, a manageable risk. Marine infantry suppressed the surrounding buildings with covering fire, while the Ontos crew climbed out, reloaded, and climbed back in. It was dangerous. It was exposed. But the Marines had learned to integrate the Ontos into their tactics so tightly that the reload became a choreographed team effort rather than a solitary act of desperation. Over the 26 days of the Battle of Hue, the Ontos fired thousands of rounds into the city, building after building, wall after wall, position after position. Marines who fought in Hue gave consistent testimony after the battle. Without the Ontos, the casualty rate would have been far higher, and the battle would have taken far longer. But honesty demands the cost be named. The Ontos was not invincible in Hue. Its thin armor meant that every rocket-propelled grenade was a lethal threat. Several were hit and damaged. The crews who reloaded under fire took casualties, and the massive backblast of the recoilless rifles in the narrow streets of a city created its own dangers, the flame and overpressure injuring Marines who stood too close behind the vehicle when it fired. The Ontos had already seen combat before Vietnam. In April 1965, during the United States intervention in the Dominican Republic, Marines deployed Ontos vehicles to the streets of Santo Domingo during the civil conflict. It was the first combat use of the vehicle, and the 6-barreled silhouette became an instant symbol of American military presence in the city. The psychological effect alone, the sight of 6 gun barrels pointed at a position, was enough to end some confrontations before a shot was fired. On paper, the vehicles it served alongside all outperformed it. The M48 Patton tank carried thicker armor, a stabilized 90mm gun, and the ability to absorb hits that would destroy the Ontos outright. The M1130 armored personnel carrier could carry a full squad of infantry and better protection. The Jeep-mounted 106mm recoilless rifle offered the same weapon on a cheaper, simpler platform, though without the multiplication of 6 barrels. Every one of those comparisons favored the conventional vehicle. The Patton was more survivable. The M113 was more versatile. The Jeep was cheaper. But none of them could do what the Ontos did at the moment it mattered most. None of them could roll down a narrow Hue street, depress 6 rifles into a ground floor window, and blow the building apart in a single volley. The Ontos was terrible at everything except the one thing it turned out to be needed for, and at that one thing it was the best weapon in the entire Marine arsenal. The Marines retired the Ontos in 1969, pulled from service even before the Vietnam War ended. The official reasoning was that the vehicle was too old, too vulnerable, and too specialized to justify continued support. The recoilless rifle itself was being overtaken by guided anti-tank missiles that could kill at greater range with greater precision and without the suicidal backblast signature. No replacement was offered for the specific role the Ontos had filled. The Marines simply lost the capability and never got it back. For decades afterward, Marine officers and historians would write about the gap that the Ontos left, the absence of a small, light, massively armed direct-fire vehicle that could go where tanks could not and deliver overwhelming firepower at close range into fortified urban positions. When the Marines fought in Fallujah in 2004, in urban combat that echoed the street fighting of Hue 36 years earlier, there was no Ontos. There was nothing like it. The capability that had been dismissed and discarded in 1969 was exactly the capability that was missing in 2004, and the Marines knew it. Only 297 were ever built. A handful survive today in museums. The National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia holds one. The American Armored Foundation in Danville, Virginia has another. They sit behind ropes, small and strange and bristling with barrels, and most visitors walk past them without understanding what they are looking at. January 31st, 1968, Hue, a machine that looked like a mechanical insect, crawled down a shattered street in a burning city, and the men who crewed it knew everything that was wrong with it. The armor would not stop a rifle grenade. The reload put them outside the hull in the open. The backblast lit up their position like a flare. Every specification said it should not work, and yet it fired, and the wall came down. It fired again, and the bunker collapsed. It fired 6 rounds into a building where men were dug in and waiting to kill Marines, and those men died, and the Marines behind the Ontos advanced through the rubble and took the next street. The army rejected it because it failed every test that measured what a vehicle should be. The Marines kept it because they understood something the tests could not measure. War does not always give you the vehicle you designed for. Sometimes it gives you a problem that only the thing nobody wanted can solve. They called it the thing. 6 barrels, no armor, 3 men inside a steel box the size of a compact car, loading rounds in the open while the city burned around them. It was ugly. It was flawed. It was the most effective weapon in the Battle of Hue. That is not an accident. That is what happens when a machine that fails every peacetime evaluation meets the one war that needs exactly what it does, and does the thing that nothing else in the inventory can do, at the moment when doing it is the only thing that matters.